the 1992, I was volunteer, and then I got elected as commissioner after that.
And I've done long.
5 years.
5 years.
Jake Hunter, I'm the news commissioner, been here 10 months now.
Yes.
Yep, well, I'm also employed at Lacey Fire District 3, been in the fire service for 15 years and started my career as a volunteer here a long time ago.
I'm Dan Bivens. I've been a commissioner for about 4 years now. Enjoying myself.
Well, I'm Brian Van Camp. I'm the fire chief, and I'll be providing the information tonight, answering any questions that you might have. I think we're
Got about another minute or so. here.
okay.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight.
You don't have any jokes?
What's
Do you have
that?
any jokes?
Don't have any jokes? No, probably none that are appropriate.
Good evening.
Oh. No.
My phone says 3 minutes after 6. I'll start. So I'll open our meeting here. We are making, the chief will be making a presentation about the proposition that will be on the ballot here on November 5th. And we'll certainly have all the time we need for any questions and answers. And we want this to be very informative for everybody. So with that, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'd like to do is give a quick background of what Proposition 1 is.
Recording.
It's recorded, okay. And it is a part of our strategic plan that we've been actually working on for the past 4 or 5 years to look at stabilizing our staffing at both this location and the North Olympia station. And of course, that means people and equipment and so forth. So as we look through our planning process, trying to determine what the cost would be to do that, we found that it would probably take more than we would normally collect in our base levy that we have to add additional staffing and so forth. So when I mentioned base levy for fire districts are allowed to levy a property tax for up to $1.50 per 1,000 of your set valuation. So if, for example, if your house was worth $1,000, your tax would be $1.50. So, you know, do the math how many $1,000 your property might be worth. So we had last year, 2023, we asked the voters to restore it from, I believe it was $1.30 something to $1.50, and the voters approved that. So that was the first phase of the ask that we were having for the voters and the taxpayers. The second ask was a voter approval of an excess levy, which would give us an additional amount of money that we'll talk about here in a moment. And so what that levy, an excess levy in the state of Washington, requires that it have special rules. It's not a simple majority of the voters to approve it. It has to have validation with a certain number of voters meeting the minimum requirements from those that attended and voted in the previous general election. Plus, of those voters, 60% is required for approval, not 50%. So in August, we had Proposition 1 was run in the primary election, and it was not approved by the voters. We did have enough voters, but we only got 58% or so of the voter approval, which wasn't 60%, so it failed. So part of our master plan was that we would, if it didn't pass in the primary election, we would run it again in the general election, which we did and are doing, and work to help answer any voters' questions and everything. Make sure that, hopefully that everybody was, voting in an informed manner and everything. So that's what this, workshop is tonight, is to explain a little bit, what, this proposed, excess levy would pay for and how much it will cost you. So can you slide back? Change. Always an AV thing. It's got this screen. Used to be slides, now it's a.
That you get back.
Okay, thank you. So just to let you know what the department's mission is obviously is to serve the community in the traditional roles that the fire department would have, but do it with as quickly as we possibly can with well-trained people so that we can hopefully make a bad situation better. Primarily, our primary business is emergency medical services. That's about 3/4 of what we do, but we do obviously still respond to fires, some basic rescue type situations that may or may not involve a medical or trauma, and an expanding role of preventative measures that we're trying to do in public education and those sorts of things to help create a little bit more resiliency in our fire district. So that's what our mission is, and that's kind of the guideline of everything that we want to do. Now, to flesh that up, see that? To do that, we have a vision that better describes how we do that. And so what we've created are target levels of service, and those are benchmarks that we use to measure how well we provide the service. Part of that is making sure that we're properly deployed. And like I say, right now, we have a fire station here and then one in the North Olympia area. And generally, the one in North Olympia covers the west side of the district, and this station, along with our unstaffed station out on Johnson Point, cover the east side of the district. Unfortunately, our district is separated by a piece of salt water that makes it really inconvenient for us to respond from one fire station. So we need a minimum of 2 fire stations. And we want to make sure, because we never know when we're going to be called to help, is that our staffing is set up so that we're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so forth, be able to respond quickly. We want to make sure that our responders are competent and well-trained so that they can provide the best service. And we also want to make sure that they have the appropriate, safe, and efficient equipment that is necessary to do that job. So this is really the lens by which we're looking at the service that we provide to the customer. I mentioned the target levels of service, and again, that's a measurement of how well that we're trying to do that. So, for example, for a medical event, our benchmark is to have at least 2 EMTs respond and begin basic life support within 8 minutes throughout the district. And EMTs are kind of the standard level of skill that we have. Thurston County does have a paramedic program, which have advanced skill capability, that if the call is necessary to have somebody like that respond, they will. And they respond from various stations in the county. For example, Lacey Fire Station, in Lacey and then downtown Olympia as well. So they'll respond into our district if necessary. For fire, our benchmark is within 10 minutes of the alarm, having 4 firefighters respond and arrive and begin firefighting with a pumper engine. And in the most of our district, it also requires that we have what we call a tender vehicle that brings the supply of the water, because most of our district is not covered by hydrants. We have a few pockets like the Boston Harbor community and the Johnson Point community that have hydrants, but most of the firefighting that we do in our district requires what we call a tender vehicle that brings the water. Are there any questions on? Yes, sir.
So is that your current level of service, or is that what you would get to if the proposition passed?
That's our benchmark, and we've been using that benchmark since 1996 to see how well we do, and we measure that. We aren't going to hit 100%, pretty difficult to do. But every month in our monthly report that I provide, I tell my bosses here how frequently we did that, what percentage. So generally for the, and we'll answer that question in one of the next slides, but there's a trend that happens on how frequently we can achieve that. So there's a slide coming. Does that answer your question?
Not yet.
Okay, if it doesn't, then we'll get to the next one. So this is the benchmark, regardless of how many people we have or so forth. And again, we've been measuring our achievement of our target levels of service since 1996 with this. Here's a picture showing the numbers of calls. A little bit small down here, but the blue is the EMS calls, the medical calls that we have. And you can see it's the vast majority of what we do. The fires, the actual fire types of responses are the yellow. Fortunately, it's a much smaller number that we do. And then the red are those other types of things, like we have false alarms, we'll have down power lines, we'll have things that aren't fire and aren't EMS that we respond to and do. So as you can see, that there's been an increase over the years, and we're experiencing from 3 to 5% increase in call volume year by year on average. So the only kind of anomaly there was in 2020 when we had the pandemic. We actually saw a reduction in call volume, but that was pretty much aberration in the trend. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a breakdown of the types of EMS calls and what is causing that increase, do you think?
Population, our population's increasing, the age is increasing, and there's a correlation between the average age of the citizens and how frequently we may visit them. Any of a number of things, but basically it's increasing population and the demographic that's involved.
Sure. And the breakdown of the types of emergency medical, any emergency situations, is it heart attacks, stroke, respiratory falls?
The vast majority of calls that we have are falls. It's probably the largest single numbers of calls, and of that blue line, that would probably be about a third, actually, and injuries and trauma related to falls. We have a number of going out and just helping somebody. They've not fallen or injured themselves, but going out and helping them get back into bed, or helping a sick person and that sort of thing. So there's a growing number of those types of calls.
Yeah, Chief, in the monthly report, there is a listing of all the calls. And the monthly reports are something that you could have access to if you want to. This happens to be the report for September.
Yeah, I'd encourage you, if you'd like more information on that, take a look on our website. We have, every month I provide a report to the board that has a lot of that data about responses as well as other business functions that we have. But like I say, a significant portion of those EMS calls we have are related to falls. Yes.
So have you actually overlaid the population growth with your graphs to see if, depending on, I hear that, that we've got an aging population out here, but to see whether the increase is higher than the population increase or
Yeah.
what?
Excellent.
Yeah, interestingly, yes. In fact, countywide, we're looking at it because we're part of the Medic One planning process. And these aren't untypical of what other departments are seeing. Obviously, the city of Lacey and Olympia are gonna have more calls, but the makeup is about the same, and the increase in calls is slightly above the percentage of increased population. But there is some direct correlation that we're looking at more carefully now, is what the impact of the aging population is. And so we actually are working with Thurston Regional Planning Commission on looking at that data. They have very granular population data that we're looking at, but certainly the demographic is a major impact, yes. So to answer your questions, this is our ability to achieve our target levels of service that I talked to you about, the 8-minute for EMS and 10-minute for fire. And so on top here, we're showing the fire, and on this mark on this side is a percentage of time that we achieve that. For example, in 2018, we achieved about a 90 percentile in meeting our benchmark for fire types of responses. For EMS, it's been considerably lower. And part of the problem with that, obviously, is that it's a shorter time frame. It's not 10 minutes, it's 8 minutes. And we have far more of the medical calls to spread the time and data over. And what that does is tend to show that when we're going to outlying areas like Fish Trap Loop or Johnson Point, some of those areas, we have significant response times out there from either one of these locations. So the interesting thing that we want to note, though, is that over time, we seem to be doing better. The dotted lines are trend lines. We're doing a little better in achieving our standard for fire. However, we have a slow decline over the years for achieving EMS target levels of service. And again, a lot of that is dependent upon increasing numbers and then having some of these calls out in the outlying areas. It takes us a lot longer to respond to. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I guess the follow-up, and because I'm a heart patient, I was very fortunate in 2011. I was working in Lacey and I had cardiac arrest. They were able, District 3 was able to get to me in under 5 minutes and shot my heart back into rhythm. And so I survived that opportunity. But that's why I'm really curious about what the times are in this district. And because I know how critical it is that particularly cardiac events are addressed as early as possible,
Right.
so that there's no brain damage.
Right.
And so that's my perspective, and
Sure.
I'm interested in making sure you guys do the very best you can.
Yeah.
So that we can save people.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point of trying to set these standards and monitor how well we can perform or achieve those targets. So you're right. For cardiac arrest, it's 6 to 8 minutes is the window from the point that you have an attack. So it doesn't include the time somebody had to dial 911 and then dispatch and all of that. So absolutely, time is of the essence. So Yes, ma'am.
Do you not have volunteer first responders anymore?
We do. Yes.
It might be able to get to that patient faster and start CPR at least.
Well, we, like I say, we respond from basically two locations. Years and years ago, we used to have basically the fire stations were just a garage where the fire trucks were, and everybody would come from home, grab a vehicle and go, or go direct, depending on how you. That's not a model that we can do any longer. Frankly, most of our volunteers don't live in the district. So what we do is they are scheduled to be assigned to one of 9 shifts that we have. So the response that you get from the district would be from one of our 2 fire stations. So, and as far as volunteer and career, when they show up on the scene, it would be very difficult to tell whether they're volunteer or career. That means basically they're held to the same training standard. Obviously, a career person has probably more experience, but they're all, capable of doing the job. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it's just different because my husband had a heart emergency and one of the volunteers lived down the street and they called her and she came over and took care of things.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the old days.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, that's where I started, was in when the firehouse siren went off and you responded. Yes, ma'am.
Do you still give free CPR classes
Yes.
and how?
Sign them up through the Medic One office. We hold them at our North Olympic station, I believe, and monthly. But you sign up through Medic One, their CPR classes. Yeah, we have regular CPR classes. Okay. So, somebody mentioned volunteers. So one of the things that's not too surprising is the dependence that we had many years ago on volunteers. And then just the way things are happening in society and economics and all of that, we're just unable to retain enough volunteers and have them be willing and certainly able and trained to respond, be ready to respond and respond. So one of the things that's really dramatic with the numbers of volunteers you see here was, again, pandemic. We had a huge fall off, and it's not uncharacteristic of many other volunteer types of organizations that we're aware of, like churches and fraternal groups and PTAs and all of that. It's just it's very difficult to. We do a pretty good job of recruiting volunteers, but the problem is just retaining them for a length of time that they become experienced and can achieve the competency levels long-term like that. So because of that, because we're not able to have enough volunteers, we've become more reliant gradually for more career staff. And, the impact of that financially is that obviously career staff will cost more than what our volunteers do. So here's comparison between what our cost of our career staff is versus the volunteer staff. So currently we're about 70% of our operating budget is spent on labor for career and volunteer staff. So this is representing 18 career responders, and this basically represents between 25 and 30 volunteers. So you can see that there's a financial impact to that. So our current status this year, actually these are data from 2023, but we had in 23 an average of 27 volunteers that were assigned to the various 9 shifts that we have, and we have 18 career responders that respond, and they're deployed such that they're spread out so that they can cover 24/7 staffing of both fire stations.
Chief, just a small nuance on that is that those folks all work together. And
Yeah.
we don't have a volunteer station and a
No.
career station. We have combined units.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. The career staff are scheduled on a 24-hour on and basically 48-hour off schedule. So a career person will work at the fire station for 24 hours. Our volunteers are generally assigned a 12-hour shift during the weekdays and a 24-hour shift on the weekend. So like Commissioner Kilpatrick said, they're intermixed in the staffing. And so a unit deployed would more likely have a combination of career and volunteer staff on it. The staffing, I mentioned that one of the critical items in our planning and looking at asking for additional revenue was being able to staff both fire stations. And what happens if we can't staff that other station increases the response time from this location. And another problem that's increasing, and we're monitoring it, are the numbers of times that we have two calls at the same time. So we may get one call and the unit will go out there and while they're still on that first call, we may get a second call, maybe on the other side of the district. So generally, 11% of the time, we don't have anybody to respond on that second call. So we count on mutual aid, which works okay, but it also increases the response time to that second call. So this is a critical measure that we're watching now. And like I mentioned before, when I say 89%, again, that's primarily for an aid car, it's an ambulance type vehicle with 2 EMTs on it. That does not mean that it's an engine company that could respond and begin firefighting operations. If you figure how many times that we have staffed the fire engine at the Boston Harbor Station, it runs about 50 to 55% of the time. So it's less than the 89% that we have an aid car there. So again, this was one of the things that we were concerned about in our planning. Currently, we enjoy an average response time. That's all calls throughout the district, about 7.25 minutes, which is not bad for a rural fire department. Obviously, most of the calls that we have are probably in the South Bay and the Boston Harbor area where we have higher densities of population. So this by no means a benchmark, because we'll have calls that routinely could run 15 minutes or more if we're having to run out to Fish Trap or to Johnson Point Road. So, but for 2023, the average was 7 minutes and 14 seconds. We also have what we call our capital repairs and replacement program and fund, which is basically a savings account to pay for replacement of future equipment in that. So all of our motor vehicles, our pumpers, our trucks, the equipment that's in the building, the equipment that's carried on, the response vehicles, is all part of an amortization plan that we have. And we set aside a certain amount every year to add to that for future payment for replacement vehicles. So for example, we needed a new pumper a couple of years ago, and we were able to fund that out of that fund. And it was at no extra cost. I mean, it was nice we had that. There was no interest involved or anything. So we have purchased equipment that way for several years now through that fund. And currently, and we've been able to fully fund that amortization plan. And then, like I mentioned before, thank you to the voters and the taxpayers. Last year, we restored our base property tax levy to $1.50. And that's currently what you're paying this year. So what does this all mean? So as far as dollars and cents, the average value of a home in our fire district is $590,000. So this is a model to show relatively how much property tax you would pay. So this year, at that levy rate of $1.50, the homeowner of that amount of a home would pay $885 in property tax for the year. So based on that, and looking at the changing assessed values, estimating the changing values in the future, which of course we can't be certain about, but based on trends and everything, we estimate that in 2025, it will go down slightly because the increased values that we're seeing on property in our community. What that will do is drive that rate down, and then in 2025, you would expect to pay $879 for that value home, and so forth through 2028. Again, this is looking at the lens of a 5-year plan that we have. So, or 5 years are 24 through 28. And these would be the expected levy rates. So the person with that average value is going to pay about $870,000 a year, or $870 a year.
Yeah, but in 4 years to 28, that $590,000 house is gonna be worth $650,000 or $700,000. Therefore, we're gonna be paying more than 861 because the value is gonna be a lot higher.
That's true, but it may or may not be true. Part of it is that it's all based on the relative value of that property with all of the other properties, how that levy is made. But essentially, that's correct. But it was difficult to determine what the changing rate would be to show that. But I guess the point is to give you an idea of the area of what the cost would be.
I think what you're trying to say is if the area is growing, and because I'm assuming most of this district is outside the urban growth boundary, so it can't grow too much other than in property value. So you can't like spread more of it around as people build, because people aren't allowed to build much more than one guy, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Most of our properties in the district are low density rated. Generally, it's a 1 occupancy per 5 acres for the vast majority of our area. And practically the areas where we would see housing development and that are pretty well done. I mean, we're approaching the plateau of what our population will be probably in the next 10 years or so. So unless something changes, who knows? But you're right. Any other questions? So this is based on the current situation. So if, for example, the voters approved the excess levy and for the same baseline value of a home, what they would end up doing is paying another $307 extra above what they're currently paying. So that increase in the voter approved levy would cost an owner of this house another $307 that year, next year, 25. And then stays there. It drops slightly, but like Rich was saying, it doesn't account for appreciated value here, but the intent was to kind of give you an idea of what the amount would be. It's not going to vary a lot. So the answer of how much is this going to cost me is essentially around $300 if it's approved. Yes, sir.
So you're saying it's an added 51 cents per thousand?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
How much did that get you for the district?
Pardon?
How much did that get the district in total? And then what's it gonna, I'm sure this is what you're gonna present.
It will gather probably $1.5 million or $2 million for us.
Okay, and what more do we get for that?
Well, thank you. What our current level, and I mentioned, if, for example, it was not voted for, if voters did not approve the levy, in the next 5 years, this is kind of the picture that we estimate that we would see. So we think that we can probably stabilize our volunteer staffing as best we can. And again, not knowing what sorts of societal or economic or things that would make it even more difficult for us to get and keep volunteers. We believe that we're based, that we would receive, continue to have about 25. We would continue to have the 18 responders that we do now. But beyond that point, depending on what the expense and the revenue would be, this number may not be sustainable either. So after 2018, it could go down. So the staffing at the two stations, meaning primarily the North Olympia Fire Station, would be down from the 80% that we're doing now to 60 to 70% or less over time, again, because of the inability to have people that we can put out to that location. So what that creates then is an increased response time. And we would say that in 2028, if these sorts of things weren't changed, that we would see an increase to at least 8 minutes, possibly more, depending on where the call volume was and everything. But the message is that our response time in the district will increase. Simple math. With the reduced budget and everything, then we would also have to pare down the amount of money that we allocate for our capital fund. So that means that there would be certain things that we would not be able to fund and we'd have to prioritize. So our assets may need to last longer. Things may not be replaced as quickly as possible and so forth. So it would affect our ability to use this fund to pay for replacement capital items. And then about, the estimated property tax levy in 2028 is shown in that other slide would be about $1.46. But this is basically what you would get for that $1.46. Now, if the voters approve Prop 1, it will bring in additional funding for us. And the plan is to maintain the volunteer staffing that we have and what we hope to have in 4 or 5 years. It would allow us to increase our career staffing by an additional 10 responders. And then what that would do with this combination of numbers, we would be able to staff the North Olympia Fire Station quite literally all the time. I hate to put 100% because there's bad days, but we could count on having 2 fire stations staffed 24/7 with this additional staff. Because of that and a better reliance on having 2 fire stations, it would also allow us to drop our average response time fairly significantly from 7 minutes and 14 seconds to about 6 minutes throughout the district. That would be the average response time. Just the availability and the of our staffing. And then this would also allow us to continue to fully fund our capital replacement program at 100%. And at 2028, the average levy rate would be about $1.97, which is from the $1.46 that was not shown. Any questions? So essentially, the purpose of what I was trying to do is explain what it's going to cost you and what the operating impact would be. So essentially, that's what it is. For the extra roughly 50 cents per thousand, it would obviously improve our staffing at the North Olympia Station and provide a reduced response time district-wide. Yes, sir.
What's our current minimum staffing for the district?
We don't have a minimum staffing standard, but obviously we're not going to respond with more than, with less than 2 people. So frequently an engine company or an aid company will be 2 people. If we have a large event, obviously generally we'll count on mutual aid to supplement the numbers that are needed, like a house fire or something like that. But our average response is about 3 1/3 people, so that's about what we're getting out on an aid call, and it's slightly more for a fire scene. So we've been fortunate to do that. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention there is to achieve the 89% that we have our staffing, our North Olympia Fire Station, we're relying pretty heavily on our career staff being there. And that's involved in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of overtime. And if we have to look at making changes to our budget and everything, we don't have the resources or revenue. We're really going to have to look at cutting a lot of that. And that's where a lot of those numbers go down, because right now we've got, significant overtime bill to pay us staffing the North Olympia Fire Station that would go away if we didn't have that new revenue.
How often do you replace aid cars? Not the engines, but the nice aid cars that are
I think our schedule is 15 years, I believe.
Yep, and the plan that we just adopted, it's 15.
Yeah. And generally for aid cars, interestingly enough, what we've been fortunate to do is get the surplus ambulances that Medic One has, and we'll refurbish them so that the 2 vehicles that we have in our fleet right now are old Medic One units that have been refurbished and put into place at about half the cost of a brand new ambulance. Our engines are at 25, I think.
Yeah.
Is it 21? And a lot of that has to do with the insurance readings that our district has and everything. But like any of the assets that we have that are covered under that plan, we really take a look at it. And if an asset is in pretty good shape, even though it's supposed to be 10 years, we'll get 1 or 2 more years out of it before we actually replace it. It's all based on the condition of the asset that we're looking at replacing.
So, you said the capital asset replacement fund is being fully funded right now.
Yes, that's correct.
So I guess I'm kind of interested in what all the money's gonna be spent on that we're gonna get, because we were at $1.20. We restored the levy to 150, and now we're going for another 1.5 to 2 million. That's about a 66% increase from 2 years ago. So where's that all gonna go?
Paying for the assets. We've had significant increases in costs for all of the assets that we've had, so we've had to accommodate for that. We continue to look at our replacement schedules, making sure that we can optimize it the best we can so that we're got enough years where we can put money in the bank to replace it. But as our call volume goes up and we have staff and so forth, the asset will wear out faster too. So the whole idea of the plan for Prop 1 is not just to raise the cost for labor, but everything else that's necessary to accommodate that, which includes equipment and training and overhead costs and so forth. So it isn't just a matter of labor cost, it's also everything else it takes to do that. And the increases in costs are increasing more than the percentage generally that we've been able to increase the amount that we put into our CNR&R fund, our capital replacement fund. So like that one slide showed, that it would go down to 75% meant that we simply can't keep up with inflation to replace assets. And that's been the biggest battle that we've had.
Seems like the biggest win is 8 new career staff, or 10 new career staff, going from 18 to 28.
Yes.
And that's huge and meaningful, and I would vote for it just for that reason.
Yeah. So, yeah, obviously, well, it's 70% of our operating budget. Yes, it's a huge impact.
Do you really think you can get to that?
Pardon?
Do you really think you can get to that?
Yes. What's the best estimate? I mean, looking out 4 or 5 years, I mean, it's a little bit of a yes, but being conservative about what our growth is and what our cost of our labor is. And the career labor are in a collective bargaining unit, so every 3 years, we have to sit down and negotiate with them for their contract, which we do. But at best, we're looking at, 5 to 7% increase in labor per year. Right now, in our current agreement, it's a 5% increase from year to year that we've agreed to. So I don't see that changing significantly based on the size of our department and the cost of living.
What's the cost of living going up?
Well, this year it was 3.5%.
Okay, but see, salaries and benefits are going up.
Yep.
You say cost of labor, so they're going up faster than the cost of living. And the benefit package for firefighters is better and has more benefits than any contract I've ever seen.
Well, that may be true. Part of the problem is that collective bargaining process is really based on what the comparables of the work unit is. So what we have to do when we negotiate wages and benefits and so forth, we have to look at what our comparable fire departments, local fire departments like Fire District 9 and 6 and so forth, and what their wage rates or benefits are. And based on the rules that we do that, we have to be reasonably within that range. So, I mean, it's really all based on the comparables that we have that we use in the negotiating process. Yes, sir.
Since the $1.50, there was about 25% increase, and up to 202 was another 33%. During this time period, the property taxes have gone. So
Sam,
who is going to write up something for the voting that says this is the good things, whatever? Like the last voter's pamphlet had nothing on it. Nobody wrote a positive thing, but somebody wrote a pretty nice looking negative.
Yeah.
So who's gonna write the positive one? Because it is a lot of money.
actually, the person just to your left there.
Thank you.
It's pretty good.
I'm gonna write, I wrote the four statement, of course, I can't do that statement. One thing I'd like to just mention about that, when you look at the levy restoration that was done last year and the excess levy that we're looking at this year, it is a big increase. But one factor to take into account, I think, is that if you look back at the budgets over the last 4 years, about the district has been spending more money than the tax revenues. I mean, they were able to do that because they had surplus properties of the small fire stations that were sold. That brought in money that was spent. The board reduced the standard for reserves, so that created some extra money. And there was a capital fund that was not being used, and the board made a choice. Rather than saving that money, we would rather use it for district, and then put it up to the voters to see, do they want to pay for the service or not?
Yeah.
So it does look like a big increase, but it's because of those factors that.
You need a good for statement because lots of retired people want like fixed incomes, and it seems to them like it's really gone up, including their property taxes, which make it $2.26 times a lot more money than even 66% now if the property taxes don't go up. It's you gotta have the fire money. They say that people I've talked to say, but that's too big of an increase.
Well, it's gonna be rivaling the school tax
Yeah.
right now.
So anyway, it needs, I wondered why there was no for it. And I
So
got
there are-
our extra 3%.
That's why I wrote it this time.
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have one in the primary election. And appreciate Milt, explaining what that increase in revenue really was hidden a lot by allocating reserves that we had to help subsidize maintaining the level that we had in those previous years. And that was a deliberate choice that we made. And knew that at the end of a 5-year period that we weren't able to draw on those reserves any longer. So this is what drove the excess levy. Yes, sir.
So, fire districts must be funded different than, say, school districts, where if you do a M&O levy, you just do the majority vote after the change in the 90s. And if you do a capital levy, like you need to redo the high school or something like that, you have to go for a bond measure. And so does fire districts have bond measures, or is it all through the levy system?
No, a bond issue is just another excess levy, same thing. It's subject to the same rules. In this case, we chose to have the excess levy, we're calling it maintenance and operations, but the rules are the same, it's just what you use the money for. So this is not a general obligation bond measure, it's strictly for operating. But you're right, for fire district, the same rule. School district have different rules.
Yeah.
You have a question?
So the station out of Boston Harbor,
Yes,
so you're saying that it's staffed 60-70% of the time with 2 people? Or
yes,
is it 3 people?
depends, minimum.
And so with that, do you staff an engine company with 2 people out there or only a car?
Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, just depends on how many people that we have.
Based on what officers, drivers, firefighters, like how does that determine? And then if you're short, will you force someone to work there overtime to make sure you can have that staff?
That's a choice that we've had to make, and as I mentioned before, part of our ability to achieve that 89% has been paying significant amount of overtime to have somebody out there for a career person out there. It also adds into the question of whether we can send somebody out there or not. So frequently it'll be, do we have enough people to deploy at 2 locations? And, 11 to 20% of the time we don't. So everybody's down here and there's nobody out at the North Olympia Fire Station.
And I guess the follow-up with that is, so if the Prop 1 passes, are you gonna staff it with 3 people with an engine company, or are you gonna staff it with 2 people with an engine company? So that, I guess, the people here know what they're getting for.
Well,
for their-
yeah, and it'll take time to gear up the additional 10 extra employees.
Yeah.
But the intent was to have about 3 average per company.
Okay. So
Again, that depends a lot on what annual leave, sick leave and so forth, because those 28 people are career staff that have given schedules and in the bargaining agreement has sick leave and annual leave and all of that. So, but we will not operate obviously less than 2 people. We just can't. And that's part of the decision-making process that we look at whether we staff the North Olympia station or just keep everybody here.
And so is engine 81, is that staffed with a minimum of 3 also, or is that 2 people?
We don't have minimum staffing. There might be times when there's 2 firefighters and an officer here at the station. But generally I don't know what the average staffing, like I mentioned before, our typical response, our average numbers of FTEs we have on our response is about 3.3. So that's telling me that average, we have 3 or more people on a given call. That's basically what the staffing would be. Did that answer your question?
Yes and no. I guess the main thing for me is, I think this is a false sense of hope for a lot of people. They see that this fire station is going to be staffed, and they think it's staffed with an engine company, And what does that do? Okay, the staffing necessarily isn't gonna be there based on what you just said, that you don't have the minimum staffing.
We don't have minimum
You
staffing.
don't have minimum staffing. And so I think if you were to come out to the voters or tell us saying, this passes, we have this much money, extra $2 million. We are going to staff engine companies, so we have that fire protection. But then we also have the close proximity to the higher call volume areas for EMS protection, for the cardiac arrest, the strokes, the advanced life support that we want our citizens to have, right? And so we go and pass Prop 1, but there's no, I guess, guarantee that that station's gonna be staffed all the time. So you say the numbers, you can't guarantee it 100%, I get that. But if you can establish a minimum staffing for the community, saying, hey, you're trusting us with the money, with excess property values, right? Money coming in. We're gonna do our due diligence of making sure, hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're putting our money out there. We're gonna make sure that these rigs are staffed so we can provide the level of service, high level of service that we want to do. Okay, and so I think that's maybe, I guess, not the discussion for Prop 1, but I think that's something that should be discussed as an agency, coming up with those minimum standards.
Well, again, we've been very careful not to state minimum staffing standards because part of it has a impact on a collective bargaining agreement, which we're not going to do. But the other is a practical sense. Now, I need to tell you that number of 28 recommended staffing and with the passage of Prop 1 came from our operating staff. We went and had our battalion chiefs and Chief LeMay, who's in charge of our operations, sit down, write the plan. And this is the number they came up with to achieve just exactly what you're saying, to have adequate level of staffing for an engine company. And so the hope would be that it's 3 people on that engine company. It might be days that there's only 2. But the anticipation is that there will be an engine company in place out there 24/7. There's no magic number between 3 and 2 on a fire, to be honest with you. A major fire event is going to require a minimum of 12 to 14 people. So we're going to have mutual aid anyway. It's just getting somebody there quickly, begin work and do what they can until, cavalry can come in. So that's part of living in a rural environment.
Yeah, and I think we moved to having like engines, fire engines, that we want to staff that. But the root of it is we predominantly run on EMS. So we want to make sure that we have that rig in service to be able to provide that EMS. And honestly, it's the engine it's nice to have. Nobody likes their house to catch on fire, right? Nobody wants that. But when it does happen, we want an engine to show up and not an 8 car, right?
Well, so if they are staffing the engine, they may choose to take the engine, which has all the same equipment that an 8 car does, or they may choose the 8 car. So it's not an issue of vehicles, it's an issue of having people. Did you have a question, Matt?
She did first. Okay. Regarding homeowners insurance.
Mhm.
What's the rating of this district now?
Our underlying rating is from the Survey and Rating Bureau's Class 3. That's called a public protection classification. That's if you have a hydrant within, 1,500 feet, relative proximity. It may, depending on where you are, how far you are from a fire station. So and depending what insurance companies, because insurance companies will vary how they charge their premiums and whether or not they use the survey and rating. But District 8 has a Class 3 overriding rating, which is pretty darn good for a rural fire department. My home out on Johnson Point, my insurance company recognizes a Class 5, which reduced my insurance premiums a little bit. 5-6 years ago, we were all Class 8, which throughout the district, parts of it were Class 9. So it was a substantial improvement based on the increase in stabilizing our staffing level, as well as better equipment and training and so forth.
So we live maybe 3/4 of a mile from North Olympia Fire Station. Is that class 3 in that area?
Unless you have a hydrant, it's probably a class 5. But again, it depends on the insurance company that you have.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But is any of this money going to raise improve the class? of this?
Absolutely, yeah. Better staffing and any reduction in response time will certainly address that, yes. Consequently, if service degrades, it will change the
The other way.
yeah.
It's probably too late. I don't know when your next newsletter is going out. But if you showed some of those graphs and the comparison of what you're gonna have with the $1.50 levy versus the 203 or whatever it is. That was very helpful to see that side by side. Just the 18 to 28 staff, which I know it sounds like it's an ideal, but that's very compelling. And I also wonder, are you going to have some kind of, how are you going to measure this and tell your constituents that in your newsletters, if you say, this is what you're gonna get, this is what our plan is, and this is how we're doing it. So in 2 years, we're not going, wait a minute, you still only have 18 staff. Where's all the money going?
It's reported monthly in our my report to the board. We have measurements that I report on.
But that doesn't get to be.
Yeah, well, it's on our website. There's a drop down of our monthly reports and it goes back to about 1999. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. But the goals and objectives that we had in leading up to this, the strategic planning, are all included in that and measured. So the performance is measured on a monthly basis and it's reported in our report that I
think
provided
most of
for.
the public isn't gonna go that deep into your website.
Yeah.
Your newsletter is very, very good and you can have some meaningful.
Yeah, what we're trying to do as far as communication is, we send out some written material, the newsletter and so forth. But what we're trying to do is have people point them in the direction if they want more information to check our website, because it's all there. Probably more than you want, but the monthly reporting on our benchmarks for our target levels of service, finance, all of those things are in our monthly report that we have.
I just make it real simple when in your newsletter would be
Yeah.
super.
And if Prop 1 passes or it doesn't, we will continue to measure our achievement.
I really appreciate you having this meeting, all the hard work you guys do.
Thank you.
That's insane.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Question on a different tangent. How many of your fires are structural versus wildfire?
Pardon? I'm sorry.
How many of your fires that you get called out on are structural versus wildfires?
Well, fortunately, most of the structural fires that we respond to are outside our district. We respond to Lacey, who has more in Olympia. But we have maybe half a dozen actual structure fires a year. We have been this season, I'm not aware that we had any major wildfires.
Small brush fires.
Yeah. Just to let you know, we have just purchased and put in place a brand new wildfire engine. So we're hopefully we've increased our capacity, and the old engine that we had here, we're putting out at the North Olympia Fire Station, all of which was paid through our capital repairs and replacement.
So listening to you tell us about things and looking at your graphs that you have shown us, it appears that you don't have plans for any more levies for the next 5 years. This levy every year stuff, it really hurts.
Understood, and an excess levy is something that needs to be renewed after a 4-year period. So part of the plan would be if it passes this time in 2028, we would ask voters to renew that excess levy. It isn't a permanently imposed tax. It has a 4-year lifespan. So if it does pass, I would tell you that to continue to receive that revenue, we'll have to have voter approval in 2028. Yeah, it's a 4-year, basically a 4-year plan. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I appreciate all your questions. They're very good questions. So I would encourage you to, if you talk with folks that have questions and that, the information we've sent out, feel free to have them give me a phone call or an email or something, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you or they might have.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for their attendance and a really excellent discussion with good insights and questions. This was made for everybody. With that, we'll close this meeting and turn off our recording, and the recording will be available